had mentioned, Paul, Net Promoter Score earlier to me as one of the earlier iterations of sentiment analysis. Net Promoter Score comes from surveys, largely. You ask people what they think on a scale, and the net positives are your Net Promoter Score. Well, that's great when you're talking about a controlled environment of 400 people in a given month. But it's different when you're looking at the unaided input and unprompted input from, say, blogs, Twitter, Facebook that might measure for a given company 100 million comments in a month. How do you manage that kind of a thing? So there's a new world that's evolving, and this is part of a larger movement that's taking place to harness what is referred to as big data. In this case, it's the unstructured data that comes from people expressing themselves by the millions and even billions in a given month on a particular topic, and harvesting and analyzing those comments to be able to create an ongoing metric that people can use on sentiment. Sentiment analysis as a science, in the way we think of it today in a big data sense, started about 7 or 8 years ago, and it's a very algorithmic kind of an approach. It started with having in essence, think of it as having a kind of a glossary or a dictionary of terms that are positive and terms that are negative, and using some form of language analysis to just look at the statistical prevalence of those words. That was kind of the first version of sentiment analysis. The problem with that is that different words mean different things in different contexts. So, for instance, if you were in the car business and somebody said, hey, that car is really unpredictable, well, you would think of that as a negative comment. But if you're in the movie business and you said, hey, that movie had an unpredictable ending, that would actually be considered to be a positive. So the context of what industry you're talking about totally changes it. So one glossary, one dictionary doesn't fit all. You have to have some context. So that was where things started to fall apart for kind of the first generation of commentary. The other problem is in understanding sentiment by topic, like to say that General Motors is a terrible company might be a comment that's valid about the company or potentially about the stock or about the management or about people who are concerned about it in that overall sense. But it may not be relevant when it comes to talking about let's say, the products that go into it. For instance, you might say, hey, I love that new Cadillac. I think that's just really, really gorgeous. The styling is fantastic. But the gas mileage is terrible, and the craftsmanship really leaves something to be desired. Well, that's a very sophisticated piece of language that just was spoken. It had multiple sentiments going on in there. And it had to do with multiple topics about specific cars within a particular company. Well, so suddenly sentiment analysis is having to deal with, in order to capture that and analyze that properly, not only do you have to have the context of cars, but as an industry or as a vertical market, but you have to be able to distinguish a comment as being partially about product quality, partially about the aesthetics of styling, partially about fuel economy, partially about whatever, and distinguish that the sentiment about one may be different from the sentiment about the other topics. So the new world of sentiment analysis is trying to take reliable ways of measuring these differences and normalizing them for each of the different products in a particular category so that you can see how positive something is versus how negative something else is. It's going, and it's not there yet with market research, with mass opinion, business intelligence. It will be replacing ultimately, as this technology matures, it will be replacing things like the brand tracking study, where where every quarter you do a survey snapshot. That'll be replaced by continuous monitoring. The current customer satisfaction research that's done, which in my mind is highly suspect because of the nature and the way the questions are asked and how it actually, it's a very artificial environment. I think that will be replaced early on. This kind of sentiment analysis and mass opinion business intelligence have to overcome, and I believe that the environment will ultimately respond to it. For instance, today, probably the biggest weakness that you have is that you don't really know who the person is that's providing the opinion. Because of privacy regulations and because of the fact that they just typically don't tell you. The data to tell you is not there. But that's getting better every day. There are systems that are coming online to be able to know who it is that's actually opining, both from a demographic perspective and from a geographic perspective. So I think over the next 5 years, nothing ever happens like that in life.
Sure.
But over the next 5 years, the urgency to improve these portions of the system will result in the adoption of new approaches and new technologies that will make this stuff even more reliable. Now, having said that, right, even though you don't necessarily know who the person is and where they are, the thing that's creating the urgency is, or the propulsion, not necessarily the urgency, the thing that's creating the propulsion for this system is the fact that these large data sets that have tens of millions of comments in them are so incredibly more correlated with real world outcomes than the former market research technologies, that people are saying, wow, I really need to know this stuff at this level because it is an early indicator of what's happening in my world. What we're trying to do here is to create a standard way of being able to measure how positive something is versus how negative something is. And not just on its own, but relative to all the other competitors in a marketplace. So we have a fundamentally different approach when it comes to sentiment analysis than the earlier technologies that are out there. Part of that is philosophical, and part of that is technology. The philosophical part is that we believe that sentiment results are no different than any other piece of data. It's a piece of continuous and as close to real-time data as you can get it. And so therefore, when you do sentiment analysis, it needs to result in some numerical output that you can use in as another element in a model that you're building or as something that you would track. On the technological level, though, there are some really big differences between ourselves and what I think of as the first generation of social media analysis tools that were used to create the first web-based, social media-based sentiment analyses. Tools like Radiant 6 or Scout Labs or Buzzmetrics, which is now NM Insight, or companies like this. The fundamental technology that first generation was built on was search technology. So think of it as kind of like Google on steroids. If I said to you, hey, I'd like to know, here's 50 cars, I'd like you to tell me what the relative sentiment is in social media about all 50, and here's Google, type it in, type what you need to type into the Google search box. You can start to see how difficult that would really be. How do I actually look at what's coming out? And like you look at Google, you go past the third page and you're looking at things that are not really relevant to what it was that you were talking about. So if you're talking about a car, the car name may be there for the first three, but then that name may be related to canned peas for the rest of the pages. And you don't really know the topics that are being discussed. So you can't say, oh, that's a positive comment related to car quality, because there's no clustering that's happening by topic of the comments that people are looking at. So it's almost impossible to use search technology without tons and tons of human interaction, which makes it expensive and time-consuming, to be able to do sentiment analysis in any kind of scalable way on an ongoing basis. And that's what we do that's different. We are not based on search technology. We're based, in essence, on pattern recognition technology. We teach our computers how to find comments that are about a topic, let's say cars. And it finds sites that we know have significant conversations about cars and learns the patterns of words that are associated with that. As a result, it's not just 2 pages of Google results and then that are relevant and then the rest are about something else. All of them are relevant. Once they've learned these patterns, they can then go to more horizontal platforms like Twitter and look at the Twitter feed and say, okay, find me instances where those patterns about cars are being repeated, and then it identifies automatically, without having to enter search terms, those patterns of words. So that's really the essence of the change. It's the difference between somebody entering in search words and a computer learning algorithms of not just words, but of the placement of words, the proximity of one word to another word, that identifies it as a relevant comment, and then clusters the comments by topic. So these are the ones about quality. These are the ones about acceleration. These are the ones about fuel economy, etc. Unless you have the ability to continue that pattern recognition and clustering capability down to that level, then rating it positive or negative is kind of meaningless. When you turn these comments into data, into structured data, you now have the ability to do. So when you look at, well, what product problem am I going to focus on fixing this month or this quarter, you now know which ones have the greatest pain to the greatest number of people, and which ones have, if you fixed it, the greatest probability of impacting purchase intent, because you're tracking purchase intent as well. And you can say which ones have the greatest probability of impacting purchase intent in a competitive sense, so that I can improve my prospective market share over my competitor, rather than just fixing something that's a problem for my own customers. Which ones are going to have the greatest competitive impact? So these are, we always knew anecdotally from a sentiment perspective what it was that annoyed people and what it was that delighted people, but we had no way of factoring that in to some organized system that could provide us with the details in the time frame that we looked at, or that we cared about, or at the cost that we needed to meet.
Sure.
We did a project for a large music company where we looked at sales of music from a downloaded perspective and an in-store perspective for a series of artists, and found that the mass opinion data, even though you had no idea of who they were demographically or where they were, had an almost perfect match on a 2 to 3 week leading indicator basis. It's the relationship between one data set versus other data sets that really create the actionable results. As an example, probably the most sophisticated users of data in the world is the financial community. They are constantly building models of technical factors that go into predicting what a stock price is going to be, or giving them signals of when several data sets come together, calling that a time to buy, when several data sets come together, calling it a time to sell. These are the guys that have the most sophisticated models, using the most variables and the most interesting analytical formulas to be able to find these relationships. just as an example, we wanted to see, well, what would happen to a financial stock model if you added in mass opinion, business intelligence, sentiment data from Wise Window? So we did an experiment with a large Wall Street bank where we took several stocks, General Motors, Ford, Southwest Airlines, and American Airlines. We took the data coming from Wise Window, which was a sentiment index of, in essence, how positive the chatter was, the opinion was about the companies and the products and services they sell, not the stocks, but the underlying thing that creates the profit and loss in those companies, which is the sale of airline tickets or the experience of flying on the airline or the cars and the quality of the cars and the level of happiness with pricing and rebate structure on cars, things like that, that we know correlate highly with sales and with market share and loyalty. How does it affect stock? So we built ourselves a model that was a classic technical model, not a fundamental model, but a technical model based on the momentum of a stock, the momentum of price, the momentum of volume in a stock. Classic model that a Wall Street company would use to trade on. And we found that then, once we built that, we added in the Wise Window consumer sentiment data by topic. So we, for instance, for General Motors, we looked at the consumer sentiment index, which we call the MOBI sentiment index, because MOBI stands for mass opinion, business intelligence. We looked at the MOBI sentiment index for car quality. We looked at it for rebates. We looked at it for purchase intent. And we said, how do these data points and these time series of data over a 6-month period correlate with the changes in stock prices and with the signals that the momentum model would have sent out on its own? We found that there was extraordinarily high correlation between those sentiment indices and stock prices. And in fact, the inclusion of MOBI data, MOBI sentiment data, to the momentum model improved the results of the momentum models between 30 and 62% over the course of 6 months.